Chapter 3. One cannot endure a penalty so monstrous as the lack of freedom without demanding of one's mind and body, a labor at once delicate and brutal, a labor capable of warping the prisoner in a direction which takes him even farther from the social world. 2 a.m. Saturday, February 2nd, 1980. I was sitting on my bed talking to the guy in the next bunk when we were interrupted by the sound of yelling and screaming. My first thought was that the man was taking some of the out-of-line inmates to lock up. Cell Block 3, the segregation unit, was just down the hall from me. It was a daily occurrence for a guard to be dragging a troublemaker through the corridor past my dorm, and equally as common for the screw to be smacking the con in the ribs with his stick all the way. But these cries were stronger than they usually were and got my curiosity up. I jumped down from my bunk and walked into the shower room to check it out through a window that overlooked the control center and main corridor. I saw screaming inmates, all right, 75 to 100 of them, running to the south end, up to the control booth, waving all kinds of makeshift weapons. Those in the front of this mob were dragging a barely crawling naked blindfolded screw by a belt loop around his neck. Those behind were kicking him in the ribs and butt and whacking him in the legs, which, like his arms, were tied. I saw someone bring a chain down hard across his back and the man crumbled, but the crowd was determined to keep him moving. They kicked him more viciously in the ass, whipping him with their pipes, while the one holding the leash yanked it hard until finally the hostage got back on his hands and knees and resumed his painful crawl. "Unlock the gate or we'll beat the shit out of your friend here," the rioter holding the belt demanded of the guard inside the booth, who couldn't be seen through the new mirrored window. Just minutes earlier, that booth guard, Officer Lawrence Lucero, had ordered the guards on the north side to lock the north grill. He'd heard one of the riot leaders announce over a confiscated two-way radio that they'd taken over the prison, were holding 7 guards hostage, and wanted a meeting with the governor, the news media, and the Deputy Secretary of Corrections. Lucero had immediately phoned the Chief of Security, Emmanuel Cornelius, at his home to advise him that a riot was in progress. Louis D. Sibaka, one of the guards on foot patrol outside the building, had also heard on his radio the riot's demands and ran into the penitentiary to help his co-workers. He remembered that renovations in progress on the electronic systems would make it difficult for Lucero to get out of the control booth on his own. Because the door wasn't operating electronically, the only way it could be opened from the inside was by reaching through the bars of the door with key in hand and blindly attempting to fit it into the lock. If Officer C. Debaka hadn't been on the ball, the guard inside the booth would have been cursing inefficiently of the administration as he perched there, locked into a sitting duck position, while all hell broke loose around him, if indeed he stayed alive that long. As it was, Officer C. Debaka made it to the control center, pushing through the mob of rioters who were shouting demands for the grill to be open. "Unlock the gate, motherfucker, or you're gonna have one dead screw on your hands," the lead rioter yelled, tugging on his hostage's leash. "No way," Officer Lucero replied inside. He didn't have the ability to open the north grill anyway, since it wasn't electronically connected to the control panel. In refusing the rioters' demand, Lucero was following the officer's code: don't give in to threats by inmates. He had to bear the consequences of heeding their code by watching the rioters attack their naked hostage, a 25-year-old guard who worked at the penitentiary for only a year. They beat him with pipes, metal table legs, chains, and homemade knives until they drew blood. Then they stopped to see if Lucero had changed his mind about opening the gate, but he hadn't. And the convicts again surged around their kneeling victim, kicking, punching, pounding him with their weapons until he fell unconscious. Maybe they let up then because he looked dead. Officer Lucero would later say he thought they'd killed him. "See what you've done now?" Someone yelled at Lucero. "If you don't open up, it's gonna be you next, sucker face." But the officer wouldn't give in. While a small group dragged the unconscious guard's body back to the south end, the bulk of the rioters started beating on the control center's new shatterproof window with their pipes. A mop bucket was hurled at it several times. Then someone grabbed a fire extinguisher off the wall and hurled it against the glass. On the third throw, the safety window began cracking. Shatterproof my ass. As slivers of glass began splintering inside the control booth, Officer Cita Baca unlocked the booth and he and Officer Lucero ran out. They must have panicked because they didn't attempt to stop the rioters by flooding the place with the tear gas stored in the booth for just such emergencies. Nor did they think to take the keys to the rest of the institution hanging in plain sight on the keyboard. Lucero, 24 years old with 3 years experience in the penitentiary, and Cita Baca, 22 with only 1 year, ran out of the prison's front entrance into the safety of the main tower. They were the first officers to escape the riot. 5 minutes after the rioters began their attack on the control booth, the newly installed bulletproof glass had a gaping hole in it, and the inmates were in command of the nerve center of the institution, with access to practically every unit. 7 or 8 of them pulled the glass loose and stepped through the open window to the booth. They demolished everything in sight. They opened the trap door that led to the compartment where all the riot gear was kept and handed it out. Tear gas guns, bombs, batons, riot helmets, gas masks. It was a bizarre scene, like some celebration of D-Day in a POW camp. As the weapons came up, the crowd grabbed them, waving them in the air, putting on the gas masks and helmets. Someone accidentally fired one of the tear gas guns, and the corridor filled with asphyxiating smoke and fumes. The mob broke into fits of choking and gasping, but those fits didn't drain the rioters of excitement. They were wild with their newfound power, jumping up and down in raging jigs. It was bedlam. The shouting became a roaring wave of war cries and curses. Let's go get the snitches. The fucking snitches. Goddamn snitches. Burn the fucking records, man. Let's go. Let's hit the pharmacy and find us some real meds. These motherfuckers want some narcos. Or some motherfucking, I forget what those are called, man. The motherfuckers that them cats be fucking crushing up and snorting. Nanas. Inside the control booth, a Chicano rioter was unrolling the folded American flag, put there every night for safekeeping. Hey man, don't you think this would make a fine poncho? Answering himself, he took a pair of scissors, cut a hole in the middle of the flag, and slipped it over his head. Later, he would become one of the main negotiators, talking over the two-way radio and wearing his American flag poncho until it got too bloody to be comfortable. The original 75 rioters who stormed the control center increased in number as the other freed inmates from the south side joined them. A large group invaded the administration offices behind the control booth and began tearing them apart, going through desks and filing cabinets, throwing everything inside them into piles in the middle of each of the office's floor and setting them on fire, burning every record of every convict in the penitentiary. They went through the ID office in the basement, where the private property, including money of newly arrived inmates, was kept. Some lucky dude found approximately $1,200 in there, money that was never recorded and is probably still floating around in the penitentiary's underground stashes, unless some con has already spread it around the joint by purchasing smack, grass, LSD, or covering gambling debts. The reveling and rioting inmates now had free access to phones and used it to call wives, cousins, and friends. People in Canada and New York knew there was a riot going on in New Mexico before downtown Santa Fe. 11 miles away knew about it. Their friends cheered them on, told them, "More power to you." These were the words they would have to regret, as I did, when the power turned barbaric. But at this early point in the uprising, just about every inmate in the prison, myself included, was silently congregating the rioters from pulling it off. Some of the snitches in cell block 4, fucking snitches, man. Goddamn snitches. Some of the snitches in cell block 4 probably were too. The freeing of bonds is always exhilarating. At least it is in the beginning. While one group was assaulting While one group was assaulting the control center and the administrative offices, totally demolishing everything in sight, another had opened the north grill and was running through the main north side corridor shouting, "This is a riot, let's go." They opened cell block 6 in the old men's dormitory where I was. But when the leaders went to get their friends out of cell block 3 segregation, they found they hadn't taken the right keys. A few went back to get them from the control center, but more stayed. They were getting near the fucking snitches. They were getting near the snitch cage and they smelled blood. Some of them stormed up the grill that separated that cage, cell block 4 from the corridor, and taunted the snitches with threats. "Breathe your last breath, motherfuckers, cause you ain't got long to live. Just as long as it takes to get the keys, you sniveling cunts. You're gonna pay long and hard. You can see now, suckface." But for the moment, luck was with the snitches. Fucking snitches. The rioters weren't able to find the keys to cell block 4, and its electronic operation, though working, was jammed. The snitches would have plenty of time to barricade their cells, though they didn't do it. For them, the next few hours were ones of grim expectation. There were 15 guards on duty inside the prison, less than half, it was later determined, than the number working at other similarly overcrowded prisons across the nation. This in spite of the fact that Penitentiary of New Mexico was known to be primed for an imminent explosion. 7 of these guards, including the shift commander, Captain Roybal, had been taken hostage on the south side. One was being hidden by sympathetic inmates in dormitory F1. Another, Officer Mike Hernandez, assigned to dormitory D1, had locked himself into the educational unit, which, along with D1, was closed off from the rest of the institution by a corridor grill. Officer Lucero, on duty in the control center, had run out of the prison. This left 5 more officers, all of them on the north end of the building, for the inmates to deal with, along with 1 civilian, the hospital technician. When the rioters gained access to the control center, these 6 staff members began to seek safety from the mob they knew would soon break through the north security grill. The officer assigned to cell house 6, Antonio Vigil, who'd worked at the penitentiary for 2 years. The officer assigned to cell house 6, Antonio Vigil, who'd worked at the penitentiary for 22 years, and Valentin Martinez, a 10-year veteran assigned this night to the snitches, cell block 4, phoned the guard on duty outside Tower 3 and informed him that they would be hiding in the basement crawl space near the gas chamber. They warned him not to transmit their hiding place over the 2-way radios because the inmates were also using the 2-ways and would pick up the information. They chose a good spot and remained hidden and unharmed for the duration of the uprising. The infirmary technician, Ross Mais, another old-timer with 22 years at the prison, locked himself along with 7 inmate patients in a small room at the far end of the upstairs section of the hospital. The last 3 guards, Officers Larry Mendoza, Edward Ortega, and Ramon Gutierrez, all assigned to cell block 3 where the hardcore troublemakers were kept in segregation, locked themselves in the basement area of the cell block. Mendoza and Gutierrez were both young. One had been a guard for 3 years, the other for only 1. Ortega, on the other hand, was a 23-year veteran of the institution. Nevertheless, it was Mendoza who proved to be the more alert officer this night. Realizing he had left the main key to cell block 3 in a small box in the vestibule of the middle level, he crawled upstairs and retrieved it. While he was there, the rioters who had just realized that they couldn't open the grill saw him and yelled, "Open the gate, Mendoza, or when we do get it open, you're dead." But Mendoza refused and returned to the basement, locking himself and the other 2 officers in an area used to store bedding. By now, 33 inmates had entered the hospital unit. They went straight for the pharmacy and the filing cabinet where they knew all the drugs were kept. They set about prying the cabinet open and in minutes had themselves a candy store of every kind of downer you can think of. from Valium to Milltown to Reds to codeine, even liquid Demerol, available to all comers in any dosage desired. There were also hypodermic needles and syringes for those who liked a more potent hit. The state had a purchasing policy that required them to buy in bulk, a policy that came in handy for the rioters, or so they thought as they stood there shooting up, swallowing pills, indulging in far more than their systems would eventually be able to handle. They filled up shoe boxes with colorful capsules and tablets, along with bottles of Demerol, syringes, and needles, heaped pills into their pockets, and staggered euphorically back into the hallway to turn on their friends. They never bothered to look into the upstairs hospital, so the health technician and his 7 inmate patients weren't seen, and in fact remained hidden for the duration of the riot. Nor did the rioters lay the unit to waste as they had every other place they'd entered. Their only interest in the infirmary was drugs. Once they had them, they unconsciously paid homage to their benefactor. While these 33 were raiding their candy store, another group was tearing apart the psychological unit. One thing the rioters seemed set on was burning every record in the prison. They dumped all the files in the middle of the floor, along with carpets, wooden chairs, and tables, and set them on fire. This was going to be a big blaze, not like the smaller ones in the administrative offices. They were out to thoroughly destroy the unit. Hey you guys, we're burning down that fucker Orner's headquarters. Let the bastards see how we feel about him. They warned those of us in the old men's dorm, which was just above the psych unit. We're gonna suffocate to death if you don't split. We know lots of you dudes are too old to join with us. Some of you got short time before you'll be getting out. So maybe you don't want any part of this shit and just want to sit it out. We can dig it, but it looks like you're being forced into it regardless. Either that or die from the smoke. I sympathize with their wanting to get back at the head of the psych unit, Dr. Mark Orner. He was a longtime member of the current 20-year-old administration and an abuser of the snitch system, a system that had landed just about every con with any balls at all in the hole at least once. None of us felt like leaving the dormitory though, in spite of the smoke that began to drift up. Between the haze it created and the crazed way these guys appeared, it was like standing at the entrance to hell. Half of them looked like space soldiers, with their gas masks and their tear gas guns. The other half looked like Old West outlaws, bandanas pulled up over their faces, wielding pipes and batons like they were rifles. Through this entrance to hell came a few bare-faced rioters passing around the pill-filled shoeboxes. I refused the offer, but others in the dorm took handfuls, hoping a high would make the craziness easier to handle. I wanted to keep my head straight and clear so I'd get through it all in one piece, because this was clearly going to be worse than I'd ever imagined. I've been watching dudes line up in the corridor just like a few minutes before, about 20 of them, queuing up like it was a shooting gallery, waiting their turn to push some Demerol into their veins, then staggering out into the crowd, waving their pipes and table legs in the air, whooping and hollering about killing that asshole that burned me. Whatever exhilaration that I felt earlier was gone. As for getting out and walking along these madmen or staying in the dorm and taking our chances with the smoke, we were of one mind. We opted for the smoke. Okay, that's your problem then. Don't say we didn't warn you, the gas mask spokesman for the group told us, and walked away with his platoon. They could have slit our throats there for not wanting to join them, but these cons seemed to understand our stake in not getting involved. We doubted that others would as the riot progressed.